Yes. We know what LA traffic could be. But I'm so excited to have this conversation. We were actually meant to have this conversation back in January. And we all know kind of what happened in January. We were dealing with the wildfires. So I was so happy to get the call to say, okay, we're ready to reschedule and we're going to do this in September. This is a conversation about the second 50, but we're in a bookshop and, I'm pretty certain that all of us as lovers of books have books on all kinds of things. When we have questions, we reach for books. When I was having my son, it was books about pregnancy or books about sleep training, books about food, books about career pivots, books about nutrition and hormones is actually my bedtime reading of choice right now. But when you look for books, there aren't that many that really talk about this second 50, this stage of life where we're still vibrant and active and have all of this knowledge and all the rest of it. There's nothing out there that really helps us with that until Dr. Debra Whitman wrote this phenomenal book, The Second 50, Answers to the 7 Big Questions of Midlife and Beyond. And she is so well placed to be able to kind of walk us through these 7 questions as a chief public policy officer with AARP. She's also worked with the federal government in the past. And yeah, we're in for a real treat to kind of ask questions. This is a conversation, but it's also a conversation with all of you. So kind of jump in with your questions. We'll leave some time for Q&A at the end. But Dr. Debra Whitman, it's so good to have you here.
Okay,
Thank
first
you
I'm
so
just
much.
Deb.
I know. Listen, I'm like, you worked hard for that doctorate.
I did. There's some Syracuse folks in here, so 5 miserable winters in Syracuse. I kept all my toes, which I feel really as proud of as the letter. But yes, and thank you all for coming out tonight. I know LA traffic and all that is always a travel hazard here, even though like we have in DC other travel hazards right now.
But we did it. So I want to kind of start up at the top. Your career really has been governed by aging and thinking about how we age and longevity and policy around aging. But I have a 13-year-old, and I don't think at any point I've heard him or any of his friends say, I really want to work in aging when I'm an adult. So what was the pathway for you to kind of to spend your pretty much all of your career really looking at aging?
So first of all, you should tell your son to work in aging because it's a growth industry. And there's not enough people doing it. And I have one of my former colleagues from the Senate Aging Committee here. But I started working, I think, on aging because I had a grandmother who lived with us. My mom was her caregiver for over 50 years, and she had schizophrenia, but she was the most loving person in my life. And we were very, very close. And I saw just how, lots of the world didn't take her seriously, but we had this connection. And so I think my whole life I've sort of worked on the aging field. And I just think it's interesting. There's a lot of people that focus on children, and I love children. I have one that's here tonight. But there's so much that happens to us in this period. And as you said, there's so little focus on it that it's where the interesting questions sort of lie for me and the interesting work.
Wonderful. So this book, you were really kind of thinking about your own 50 as you were approaching 50, and a number of questions kind of came to the forefront for you. Can you just walk us through what those questions are? Because those are the questions that really do create the foundation for the book.
Sure. So yes, I'd worked on aging for 25 years, and then I was about to hit 50, and suddenly everything became real. And so I wrote down the things that I wanted to know about, and they became each of the chapters. So the first one's kind of basic, like how long will I live? Will it be 50? Will I be healthy? I thought about some practical things like how long am I going to work, or will I have enough money? And then some tough questions like how will I die? Which was my favorite chapter to write, actually, at the end of it. And will I lose my memory? And so for each of the chapters, I dove into the research. I interviewed experts from all over the country. I talked to people about that were going through things. So I talked to a woman with dementia when I was writing the chapter on Will I Lose My Memory? And then sort of compiled that with lots of stories of my family's and personal life, which I have to say, as an economist, was a little awkward. But now everybody knows about my husband's Uncle Barry, and all of the people in my life.
It was his 90th birthday recently.
It was, and I told him if he made it to 100, I'd write the third 50.
Barry's going to hold you to that, right?
He will.
So in terms of, we think a lot about longevity. We all want to live long, healthy, kind of vibrant lives. What are the things that we should be thinking about when it comes to longevity?
So who wants to know what the research says of how to live longer and healthier? Right. So the basics are things that probably your doctor has told you for years or you already know. So if you do these 5 healthy habits, it'll give you about an extra decade. Let's guess. Eating right, exercising, don't smoke, don't drink too much, and maintain a healthy body weight. Even if you do 1, you get an extra 2 years. So any little bit helps. My dad only does 1. He gave up smoking when my brother was born. And so he does the 1, but what he also has are other healthy behaviors. And I think this is what our doctors don't tell us enough about. The first thing is our relationships actually are a huge component of our health. So I spoke to Bob Waldinger, who's a professor at Harvard and a Buddhist monk, really cool guy. And he has worked on the Harvard study of adult development, which started interviewing people. I see some heads nods. You might have read The Good Life by Bob Waldinger. It's a study that started interviewing people in Boston in the 1940s and then followed them their whole life. And so he had the same people over decades. And he looked at healthy 80-year-olds and he said, well, what did they do at age 50? What was different about the healthy ones than the ones that were not healthy? And he looked back, and it wasn't their cholesterol and it wasn't their exercise. It was the quality of their relationships. So if you think about making sure that you have people in your life, and they could be near or far. My best friend lives in Germany. We were just on a phone call for a couple hours the other day. Near or far, that are meaningful to you. So that's 1. The other one, where the research is incredibly strong, I'm going to give you a little test to see if you'll pass it. All right? It's audience participation time. So I want you to close your eyes and picture an older person. And I want you to think of the first word that comes to mind. You got it? All right, now raise your hand if that word is a positive word. All right, everybody with your hand up, keep it up, raise it high, because you guys live 7.5 years longer. So our mindset, if we think of aging as a positive time and we think of it as growth and opportunity, then we live 7.5 years longer. And it's not just you live longer, but you actually have lower cardiovascular risk. The brain density of people who have a positive view on aging, of course, they looked at it after they died, is actually greater. And so, it's a bit of mind over matter, but it's also that our mindset changes our behavior, right? So if we think aging is a time where we still got to work and have purpose, or give value to the people around us, we are more likely to take better care of ourselves and be more engaged. So if I said 2 things, I'm going to give you one last one, and that is purpose. So I don't know how many of you have read, we're in a bookstore, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Somebody who has a how can survive, or somebody who has a why can survive almost any how. And so having your sense of purpose of why you get up, and it could be you take care of somebody else, you have a 13-year-old son. It could be that you have a pet that needs you, or even a plant. They've found that even having plants or birds in nursing homes help people to live longer. And so those are my low cost, no cost longevity interventions that, I'm not selling any vitamins or anything. I'm selling purpose, meaning, and relationships and mindset.
I have a real life example of the kind of purpose and mindset part. My dad will be 86 in a few weeks, and he lives in the UK. He's coming out to visit to celebrate my son's 13th birthday, because their birthdays are a day apart. They're so sweet. They're like the same people, but like 70 odd years apart. It's quite freaky. But he tried to retire, and he literally managed to retire for 2 weeks, and he was like, I cannot do this. And he's still now, you know, he retired probably about 16 years ago. He goes to work every day. It's for 3 hours a day. You know, he goes and he's training. He was an engineer by trade, and he's training the young engineers, you know, but his whole thing is just like, I just like talking to people. And he has his work shirts, and he gets on the bus and he goes to work, and then he has a routine, but it is the thing that really is keeping him going. And he's mentally really sharp, you know, he's physically very fit and active, but it is this thing about relationships and also purpose that really kind of keep him going. The other part of that too is community. And, you know, I think all of us here in LA were touched in some way, shape or form by the wildfires. And we really saw LA come together as a community and really kind of pull and help each other. How do we foster community? You know, we're in the middle of kind of like a loneliness epidemic as well. Yeah. So how do we really think about fostering community, which is going to help us in our longevity journey?
Well, I'll tell my dad's story. So I told you he doesn't do a lot of the healthy habits, but he's pretty healthy at 89. And one of the things he does, I live in a small town, or grew up in a small town. So he goes to the post office and he'll spend an hour up there every day, just talking to every single person that comes in and get their mail. Now the postmistress just changed. And so I'm a little bit worried that he won't have that same kind of connection. The other thing is he volunteers at a golf course in the bar. He does not golf, but it's like a community bar. And so he just loves serving the drinks and talking to the people as they come through. And so, you know, those types of connection, which, you know, are easier in a small town where you basically know everybody. We have to find ways for those. And I talked to a researcher who said, you know, even just saying hello to somebody at the checkout line, it doesn't have to be, you know, your best friend. Sometimes it's just that nice smile that you get from somebody when you're standing in line, and, you know, talk to them about something they have in their cart, or even for people that can't leave their houses, just simply waving at people on the street as they walk by is another way to connect. So finding what is meaningful for you. And I think actually during the pandemic, the rise of, yes, there was the social isolation, but also people realized they could have Zoom chats and other ways of staying in touch. And I think that those are also really important. Mm-hmm. Nothing beats touch, but
but it's something.
Yeah.
Another part of community is the workplace. You know, we all spend a lot of time in work, be it virtually or kind of in real life, and work is attached to kind of purpose and all those kind of things. But we're also living in a period in the United States where we're seeing a lot of people being laid off for various reasons in different industries. Talk to me a little bit about kind of how we navigate work in the next 50, especially as we kind of lay on this kind of issue or time that we're living in, where layoffs or struggles around work are really prevalent.
So the question for that chapter is, how long will I work? And I think I thought, how long I want to work, right? It's my choice. And one of the things I was most surprised by is that half of us in our 50s will lose our job involuntarily. Half. And only 10% of the people that lose their jobs ever make what they did in the past. And so there's this view that our careers are sort of linear and we keep growing, and, you know, some of us get to work for the same company for many, many years, and we just go up higher and higher. But the reality is actually a lot different. And we can lose our job involuntarily because we're fired, and job loss is more prevalent as we age, and it takes longer to find a job as we age. It takes longer for older women than it takes for older men. It takes longer, even more, for older women of color. And so all of the discrimination that we face throughout our lives are actually compounded by ageism. We also can lose our jobs because our own health goes out. Many people have more and more health conditions as they age, particularly if you had a physically demanding job. Or sometimes we have to quit because we have to care for somebody else. And that is becoming more and more a factor in people having to leave their jobs because we don't have a good care system that allows people to remain working and their loved ones to be able to get the care that they need.
And another kind of added complication to this too, and you can hear from my accent, I am not from Los Angeles originally, but from the UK. We have a universal healthcare system in the UK. We don't here. Here in the US, our healthcare is often attached to our jobs.
Yeah.
So how do we even navigate that?
That's been a real focus of my career, is to make sure everybody has healthcare no matter where they are. And so, we've sort of built pieces onto systems that weren't designed to really provide for everybody. And raise your hand in the back. I have a soft voice, so if it starts going low and you can't hear. Is it low? Do you want me to? Okay, thank you. So we were talking about healthcare in this country, and many people don't know that the reason we have kind of such messed up systems is because in World War II, there was a wage freeze. And so a lot of employers were able to get around it to hire more people and to be more attractive place by giving either pension or healthcare benefits. And so that's why a little bit our country is different than almost everywhere else, is because that's the way healthcare, employer-based healthcare and retirement benefits started. But it leaves huge holes for anyone whose employer isn't deciding that they want to offer those benefits. Ashley and I, when we were in the Senate, worked on the Affordable Care Act so that people whose employer didn't have a plan, you could buy it through a marketplace or you could qualify for Medicaid. So we have this sort of Frankenstein type of a health system now, and it's very fragile. And there's going to be requirements that you have to work in order to get health care being put into place. And that's a problem for older workers who may, again, physically can't work and not yet qualify for Medicare. So we have a hard system. And unlike the UK, the social care, the non-medical care, things like if you need somebody to come over and take care of you, which I know we have some caregivers in the audience, our programs don't cover that, unlike many other countries.
And it's also things like, I was listening to an interview with you talking about things like dental care, eye care, ears, ear, nose, throat care, like all the things that, eye care that really do begin to disintegrate as we age.
Yeah, all my Medicare people here probably know that it doesn't cover your eyes, your ears, or your teeth. 3 things that all age with the rest of your body.
It's like you can't just take them out and put them to the side and just kind of pop them back in. That's wild. What this does bring to mind for me, and as I was reading the book, was really thinking about equity.
Yeah.
And how, and we kind of saw this with the wildfires too. If you had good insurance, you were able to be put up in a hotel or put into a rental. The process of kind of getting through that really horrific period in life was a little easier. And those who were not in that position, it still remains many months later really difficult. How does equity play into how we age, things like longevity, how long we stay in the workplace, where we might live, how we might be cared for?
All of those. I'll take the first one.
Yeah.
So how long we live differs a lot in this country. If you are a woman, you actually live 6 years longer than men. If you have a college degree, you live 7 years longer. If you're in the top 1% of wealth, you live about a decade longer. And those aren't additive. You can't say, well, I'm a woman with a college degree.
I'm 150.
I'm going to live to 3,000. But so we have these differences. And then we also have huge geographic differences. So if you look at the longest lived city or county in America, at least when I wrote the book, it was It was Summit County, Colorado, which is where Breckenridge is. I don't know if you are all skiers or not. It has a 20-year higher life expectancy than Ogallala Lakota County in South Dakota. 20 years in driving distance. And it's not because, people are biologically different in these areas. Ogallala Lakota it's a home of the Pine Ridge Reservation. You probably have on the bookshelf Bury My Heart and Wounded Knee. And they've faced years of underinvestment in healthcare and all kinds of things. Now, I am told by people in Colorado that Summit County people leave when they're no longer able to handle the altitude. So it's a little biased. So it's may not actually be a blue zone. I don't know if you guys are all watching the blue zone. Yeah. Geography doesn't make you live longer. It's not like if you go for a vacation in Breckenridge, you're going to live longer. It's just if you're a hiker in Breckenridge and you eat like the people in Breckenridge and you exercise and you have a sense of community, and all of those things can be protective for our longevity. So I also looked at factors, racial and ethnic factors. And so the stress of racism, actually, there's a term called weathering, where the actual physiological stress becomes embodied in our health. And so if you look at somebody who's faced years of racism, physiologically, they are aged more than people who have not faced that. And so if you look at racial and ethnic disparities, you're capturing some of those as well.
Yeah. One of the things, as I was reading this book, I literally kind of talked to everybody as I was reading this book. I was like, you got to read this chapter. And what I love about it is that you don't have to read it all in one go. You absolutely can. And it's a great read, because I think you're just such a lovely storyteller in amongst kind of like the numbers and the facts and the data. But you can also just kind of pick up sections and be like, okay, I really want to read more about kind of longevity, or I really want to dive into the workplace, kind of like where will I work, or the financial part. You can kind of pick and choose your own adventure, so to speak. But as I was talking with friends about this, one question that kept coming up was, well, how does all this play out if I'm single? How do I think about preparing financially? How long might I need to work? Or when it comes to your favorite chapter, and I want to talk about that in a moment, about kind of, how will I die? How do I think about that if I'm someone who is maybe not married or didn't have children?
Well, thanks for saying that about the book. It is a bit of a choose your own adventure. You can pick up any chapter and you didn't have to read the 3 before it, or you can skip a chapter and that's fine. And I wrote it that way because I think we hit different moments in our lives where, like, your mom's diagnosed with dementia. I'm going to read about what does that look like? How does that work? What are things I have to think about? Or I'm going to stop work, so maybe I should read the Will I Have Enough Money chapter. I think I did a bad job in the book of talking about single people. And I'll just say it's, as we age, this sense of community is often thought of just as your family. And I think, to borrow from the LGBT community, your chosen family can be just as important. But you also still have, in the same way your own family, you still have to have those conversations about, what are you willing to offer me? What am I willing to offer you? And how can we help support ourselves? Not to bring mid-century modern into it, because I've got some folks here that worked on the show, but I think it's a beautiful show about how building this sense of community. And Grace and I just watched Golden Girls, how for that generation, for women, of finding people that can help care for you and live together. I think most of our there's a growing amount of people who are living both their own lives single and without kids. And there's a huge rise in gray divorce of people saying, you know what, I don't want to live with this guy or gal for my second 50. I lived with him my first. Now I'm done with that. and so thinking through, again, our systems were built on like husbands and wives and families and kids taking care of us, and that's just not the reality that most people have. I'll say the hardest question I've ever gotten in one of these was a woman that came up to me afterwards in tears because she was taking care of her mom who had dementia and her dad who had health issues, and she was exhausted as a caregiver. But what she really worried about was her own future, and who was going to help do all the things that she was doing for her parents because she didn't have children or a husband. And, I think as a society, we need to think about, how we can't just force everybody to figure that out for themselves.
Yeah, because it's a big thing. It's a big thing to kind of figure out.
And I don't think I did a good job. I'm just going to say
that's just for when you do. That's when you do the second edition of the second 50. That will be included.
Yeah.
Something else that kind of came up to, and we were talking about this outside. So I have a 13-year-old, and I also have two parents who are in their 80s. One of them I'm actually going to be helping to kind of take care of soon because she's not well. How are we navigating kind of, as we launch into our second 50, depending on what age, if you had children, if you had them later in life, you may really be very deeply in that kind of sandwich generation where you're a caregiver on both ends and also thinking about what does this look like for me 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now. Any words of wisdom or advice for friends? I am friend.
Joanne just shared that she's about to leave to go take care of her mom and have to do it. So like, what are some of the thoughts that went through your mind?
I had guilt about leaving my husband and son. I'll be gone for about a month, 6 weeks or so. I was really thinking about the impact on my job. I'm a kind of a media executive. Like I have responsibilities in the workplace, but most of it, I'm really thinking about my mom and like, okay, I can be there for, kind of 4 weeks to 6 weeks to kind of get her through this particular period. But what if it needs to be longer? My parents divorced many years ago, and my mum has been very happy kind of by herself, incredibly independent, big community, but her community is starting to die off.
Yeah.
So I'm really thinking about like, do I have to think about moving her in with us? What does that look like? How does that change the dynamics of our home? What impact might that have on my son? So it's kind of this real hodgepodge of feelings, but it's more so how can everybody be okay and how can I make sure that everybody gets what they need?
Well, and
how am I going to afford all of this?
Yeah. Well, and you're a little lucky but your mom scheduled this.
Yes.
I have another friend whose mom was out walking her dog, and the dog saw a squirrel and took off, and she went flying and broke her hip and broke her shoulder, and the daughter had to drive over a few hours later as soon as she heard of it, and so it's kids. We plan for 9 months. Sometimes caregiving just happens in an instant. And so it's really, really hard. It's incredibly expensive, particularly if you have to quit your own job and tap into your own retirement savings. And even if you're not tapping into retirement savings, you're probably not able to build up your own nest egg. And the cost of care is just ungodly expensive. I see some heads nodding. I was talking to a couple people at a cocktail party, and both of them had moms in memory care for $200,000 a year, and it didn't cover incontinence care. That was like, and so I think we have this pivot moment where we think of aging as separate from working, but it's workers that are having to take care of older people, and older people are taking care of each other. My parents have been driving their neighbors into the doctor for many, many, many years. My advice to people is figure out what's important to them and figure out what's important to the older adult that they're taking care of, because they may not want to live with you. She may have her people and she wants to be with her people. And you know what? She likes the island life and her favorite food place and all of that. And that is what's the most important thing to her. So you have to build around that. It may be that you realize that it's good to raise your son with the grandmother around, because then they go into aging and have a great career. And that might work for you too. Like there's no one answer, and the answer changes overnight when something happens. And just knowing that. But it's also, again, not all older people need care. My parents are 89 and they've been very healthy up until this point. And so sometimes we just assume everyone will, need something tomorrow, or everybody will lose their memory. And we don't look at it. This can be, many, many decades of great life and contribution. And we're actually happier as we age than more in our midlife. So, maybe the people to feel sorry for is the, is the working on.
Yeah. My mom is very clear that she does not want to live with us. She said she lives in the Caribbean, so she has this beautiful lush garden, and she's like, she cannot get on board with succulents at all. She's just like, what is this? I'm like, oh, it's fine. We have a few minutes and kind of get your questions and things ready. You mentioned that one of your favorite chapters to write was the How We Die, or How Will I Die chapter. Say more.
It was the thing that I personally knew the least about and was the most curious. I interviewed a palliative care nurse because I didn't know what it was like. When somebody dies, how do you know they're about to die? What does that look like? My husband was with both of his parents when they passed. I've never had that honor. And so just talking to her about that, and I wanted to know some basic things. Again, I'm an economist, so there's 1,000 footnotes, but I want to know how many of us die quick, right? So I looked that up. It's only about 15% of people die instantaneously. I wanted to know about hospice and palliative care, and how does all of that work? And the answer is many people wait too long to receive those benefits. And part of that is because we place all these barriers on getting it. You have to give up all of your curative treatment. You have to have a diagnosis of terminal illness. So all of these different stages. And I talked to widows that had lost someone, and what it was like to sort of have somebody that had been your partner your whole life go away. There actually is a phenomenon that the risk of dying after you've lost your loved one goes up, because literally your heart valves or walls, I'm not sure. I'm an economist, not is changed somewhat. So I found it really interesting. And then one of the best parts about my job is I go to other countries to study how aging is done in other countries. And I went to New Zealand because I was particularly interested in the Maori population. I grew up next to a reservation in Washington State, and so wanted to understand, sort of how their healthcare systems were different, because they had created one for the Maoris. And I went to this town called Rotorua, and I met with this woman, Katie, and she started the Kiwi Coffin Club. And maybe we need one of these here, because what it is, it's kind of arts and crafts plus a death conversation plus a social club. And they decorate their own coffins. And they were beautiful. One woman hired an artist to paint all of her favorite hikes around New Zealand. One guy had a Elvis one tricked out. They would decorate and give coffins to families who were losing children to cancer. So they made a little speed car for a kid, and they donated coffins for families that couldn't afford them. And so it was just this lovely way of talking about death and dealing with death in a way of making it your own. And also just getting together and having the sense of community that we talked about as well.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you shared that story. I actually went to New Zealand back in April, and I was kind of like, oh yeah, that seems like something that I would do. That kind of made sense. But it all kind of brings it back to kind of what you're doing with the book is helping us really understand that this kind of next part of life isn't something for us to be scared of. It's actually, we have a lot of agency and there's a lot of research and data that can really help us as we navigate it. So I'm going to turn it over to all of you for questions.
This isn't so much of a question as an opinion. So I worked for the John Wayne Cancer Institute for 10 years. And my mother, when I worked at the funeral home where Ronald Reagan was buried, I offered to get her all the things, papers and stuff, and she ripped it up in front of me. But to make a long story short, I really feel that Jack Kevorkian should have been given a Nobel Prize. He was brilliant, and not be put in jail. And I thank Jerry Brown because I've already told my children, I think people should have the right to die without feeling bad. And I've been a caregiver, so taking care of a lot of people, including my boyfriend who was a double lung transplant. You should have that right, especially if you have terminal cancer, which runs in my family. Cancer runs in my family. So I think that we have to start thinking smart instead of sentimental. I don't know whether any of you watched the program on Bruce Willis. And now, I'm not on any public sites or anything, but now they're knocking his wife because she has him in a separate area because she has 2 teenagers. It's a terrible job. And my best girlfriend has dementia and Alzheimer's. And thank God she has a good husband. But, you know, it's a terrible thing to have to deal with. And you have to be like a doctor. You have to be able to separate yourself mentally, because it's so exhausting, especially if you're taking care of somebody in hospice. So I think people have to really realize that nobody expected us to live this long. And Social Security definitely was not set up for that. And very few companies offer pensions now. And both my niece and my daughter are attorneys. And they realize that things aren't, these kids grow up and life isn't really like we think it's going to be. I mean, my niece froze her eggs, for example, and she's stunningly beautiful and smart. But she went to Williams, which is a top school. She has not been able to find anybody, so she just had a baby on her own. And thank God my sister is helping her out, but it's taking a toll on her also.
We have so many kind of options in life, don't we, to think.
And then my sister that's helping out my niece was a stewardess for 34 years, so she's traveled all over. And she said, it's so different in Europe because the younger people come in and take care of the older people, which makes sense.
Yeah, it's a big kind of cultural thing. But and thank you so much for your comments. Are there any questions? And if we could actually kind of form as questions, I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Can we talk a little bit about the financial piece? We didn't touch on that question, and can we afford it?
Which part do you want me to touch on?
Anything. It's all fascinating to me.
Yeah.
Will I be able to afford it?
Will I be able to afford it?
That's the big question.
Listen, we you know, as I talked about the disparities in life expectancy, and I gave you that health insurance lesson, which I'm sure nobody wanted to hear, but I had to. Some people their whole lives can save for retirement and put money aside, and they have extra money to put aside. Half of workers have no way to save for retirement. Actually, one of the things you guys did here in California was Cal Savers several years ago, which I was really pushing for, to make sure that every worker in your state can actually put some money aside for retirement. And so more and more states are starting to do that, but that's only been around for a few years. So used to be there was a four-legged or three-legged stool that you'd have a pension, which we just talked about. Most people are not offering pensions unless you work for a government or a union. Your own savings, which, as I said, half of the workers actually don't have the ability to do it easily through their paycheck. And then Social Security. I've been working on Social Security issues for the last 25 years.
Thank you.
It would have been much easier to fix 25 years ago. In fact, Ashley and I wrote a report that said only minor tweaks were needed a couple decades ago. And many people don't understand how it works, but it's the only program that we have where the money coming in has to equal the money going out. Every other program in the federal government doesn't have to be self-financed. So if we took that requirement again away, just like every other program, it would be fine. But because of this requirement, the money coming in has to equal the money going out. And even though the baby boomers actually paid more than the money going out and build up these huge trust funds, the last time they touched the program was in 1983. I was 13. And at the moment, the latest trustees say that it won't be able to pay out full benefits in 2034, the year I turned 64. Now, it's not going bankrupt. It means that there'll be a shortfall. And by law, again, money coming in has to money going out. Everybody who is getting a Social Security check will only get about 20% of what they're owed, if nothing is done at all. Yeah, that's a problem. But it can be fixed. And I believe even as crazy as things are in Washington, this is the one program that so many families rely on, that's not going to happen. But I would like to plan for my future. I want to know what I'm going to get. And so I continue to work to try and push resolutions so that we can make sure that everybody gets the amount they need, and not just for me, but for my kids and my kids' kids. We just celebrated its 90th birthday. And actually, I got to interview Jim Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt's grandson, and his great grandson was there too. So
cute.
Yeah.
So this is directly related. Is there any benefit then? I was going to try to wait as long as I possibly could to take Social Security so that I get the higher payout because I don't have a pension.
Yes.
And I've been a good saver, but I don't know how to make wise investments. And so I'm afraid that everything I've accumulated could go away poof if I do something stupid. And so I want to delay Social Security as late as possible because that's my pension. That's the money that I can count on. But am I at more of a risk at waiting because it could go away than if I started taking sooner?
No, and actually the data is a lot of people are taking it this year, like way more than should be because they're worried about that. And I'm going to tell you no. Every year you wait, you get 8% higher, which is a pretty darn good return. And Social Security is the only thing that's also going to be inflation protected and provide survivors. And just a reminder to everybody who doesn't love Social Security as much as I do, it's not just a retirement benefit, it's a disability benefit. If you or I, God forbid, actually my kids are too old, your kid would get a survivor's benefit. So it provides all of these other types of insurance. So I advise people to wait as long as they can. Not everybody can. And also look at your own life expectancy, which I just told you may be higher than you thought. But it's a great program, and 90 years of being there and keeping people out of poverty. It's the one program that we've all paid into, so we earned that benefit. We've also paid into Medicare. We've earned that benefit as well. So I am confident. And needing myself that the program will be there. I just want to know how it's going to be there. And we did a survey with the Chamber of Commerce and others. Most people just want to pay more so that they can get what they're owed.
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. Other questions? So we got this next 50 sorted. We good?
I was curious how religion or that kind of community can play into that.
So I got to give a talk at a mega church this year. So I actually know the answer. Yeah. Actually, yes, people, it both, so your faith increases your sense of purpose. And if you actually attend church services, that gives you a better sense of community. So, so it's not just your belief in God, but it's also practicing with others can be also both health enhancing and longevity enhancing.
Other than single women in the second stage, what are some of the things you wish you would have thought of? Chapters 8 and 9.
Thank you. There's been a lot of things through the questions. Like I think I touched a little bit on mental health in the book, but I'm getting a lot of questions about that. As I said, in general, people are happier as they age. But I did write an op-ed because depression is still a thing at all ages, and so is mental illness. And people can get treated at any age if we take mental illness as separate from aging. So a lot of doctors are assuming that depression is a natural part of aging when it really isn't. I interviewed one woman who said, you know, I finally found a therapist who diagnosed me with gave me a proper diagnosis when I was in my late 60s. Had I known that, I would have had so much better life. So I think I wish I had done a little bit more of that. I did talk about elder suicide. You brought up medical aid in dying, which actually not a lot of people actually use it, even in the states where it's legal for many reasons. It's difficult. But the rate of suicide among older men is twice as high as teenage boys. And mostly because attempts are more fatal. And also, you know, back to the loneliness and isolation. All you ladies came with a friend to hear this tonight. Thank you to our gentlemen as well. But a lot of older men don't know how, especially after they've left the office, like your dad, you know, how to connect with others. And so looking at the men in your family and figuring out ways to connect with them can also be really important. But I wish I had gone deeper. I think I'm probably not the right person to write that book, but I think it's really, really important.
Yeah, one more. Any others at the back? If not, we'll come over here.
So again, more or less directly relating to that.
Yeah.
Because I think when you listed the 5 factors, I scored very high, and then you went the importance of relationships, and it's like, oh, I've never been married, I don't have children, blah, blah, blah.
Oh,
so what my question is, do you have tips for how to get the ball rolling to build a stronger community of relationships?
That's a really good question. It doesn't have to be a marriage. In fact, people can be lonely and isolated and married.
Yeah, no, I understand.
Yeah. I think all of the things that people tell you to do throughout your whole life is also, I think, relevant as you age. You know, how do you find an environment where you can connect with others in a meaningful way who like to do things that you like to do, so you will reconnect with them? And how do you reconnect with people maybe years ago, and maybe it's you doing the effort every time, but still, how do you make sure that that you find value in that relationship? So the difference between loneliness and isolation is whether we feel it ourselves. Like I am perfectly happy reading a book all weekend long. My husband will go crazy. But finding the things that are meaningful to you that you can do with others, and those kind of conversations that you need, find the people that want to have them with you. I do think dating is hard at this age for love, but also you need to sort of date friends. I know, a lot of my life was work and kids. And so finding time for my friendships now is something I'm really trying to prioritize. in a way that maybe I wasn't able to do or didn't invest in the past.
Sure.
Thank you all for such brilliant questions.